rainstorm howled outside the window, the sound of the waterfall pounding down incessantly, as if wanting to erase everything in the world out there. One evening, Ethan Hall, a 23-year-old poor law student, sat quietly in his shabby rented room, his eyes hazy through the frosted glass. He had never thought his life would change so quickly. His phone suddenly vibrated, the ringtone breaking the silence with its message alert. Ethan looked at the screen, and there was only a strange phone number. He hesitated but still answered the call. The voice on the other end startled him. "Hello, Ethan. I am Eleanor Brooks. I want to meet you." The short, cold sentence held something special that he couldn't ignore. Eleanor Brooks was not a name Ethan was familiar with. The 71-year-old woman was famous for her wealth and power in the elite circle. That name seemed like a symbol of luxury and mystery, but there was no reason for Ethan to associate with someone like her. However, her invitation was too difficult to refuse. Her words made him unable to stop thinking, as if a strong force was pulling him into an adventure he couldn't foresee. He agreed to meet her. A small cafe, dim lighting, and the sound of raindrops tapping on the roof created a lonely atmosphere. The room was quiet, with only soft music playing. When Ethan entered, he saw Eleanor sitting there, her calm gaze as if she had been waiting for a long time, her slender figure, snow-white hair, and a face that was cold yet full of pride. She didn't look like a frail old woman, but a woman who still exuded power and dignity, making others unable to look away. Eleanor smiled faintly when she saw him. "Hello, Ethan," she said, her voice deep and strong. "I've been watching you for a long time. I can help you. Help your family escape from these hardships. But I have one request. A very simple request. Marry me." Ethan froze. Her proposal was like a shock, making his heart feel as if it had stopped beating. "Marry you?" he whispered, unable to believe what he had just heard. Could she be serious? "Yes, marry me. I will wipe away all your family's debts, and I will protect you for life. Not only you, but your entire family will never have to worry about money or anything else again. You only need to do one thing. Agree to marry me," Eleanor said, her eyes shining with determination and resolve, as if there was no other option but to accept her offer. Eleanor's words were like a wave crashing into Ethan's mind, pushing him into a state of utter confusion. An unbelievable proposal, yet it was a chance to save his family. Huge debts weighed heavily on him, and his family's life, after his father's death, had always been submerged in the darkness of poverty. But the question kept echoing in his mind. Could this be the opportunity he had been waiting for? Or was it just a trap he couldn't escape? Ethan felt like a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. But the offer was so tempting that it couldn't be ignored. He looked at Eleanor, the powerful and mysterious woman, and vague thoughts began to form in his mind. Could this be salvation, or the beginning of an unforeseeable disaster? He couldn't stop thinking about it. The question still echoed in his mind. A crazy offer like this? Could it be a chance to save his life, or a terrible trap he couldn't escape? Ethan Hall sat in his small rented room, his eyes staring blankly out the window. He was a final-year law student, but his life was far from what he had dreamed of. After the sudden death of his father, his family fell into poverty, and since then, all the burdens had fallen on his shoulders. His mother, a strong woman but weak in the face of life's difficulties, was still struggling to keep the family stable. His 16-year-old sister was too young to understand everything that was happening, and amidst all this, Ethan had to live with mounting debts that he didn't know how to repay. Although he didn't believe in love, his heart still held ideals and self-respect. He had always promised himself that he would never become a failure, but faced with this situation, his ideals seemed to be fading. All hope seemed to be shattering, and Ethan didn't know if he could find a way out. That evening, as he sat in his room, once again, the phone rang. He wasn't surprised, but when he saw the unfamiliar number, a strange feeling ran down his spine. It was Eleanor Brooks. The name, although unfamiliar, carried an invisible weight. Eleanor Brooks, a 71-year-old woman, one of the wealthiest and most powerful women in the elite circles. She was rich, powerful, and influential, but it was precisely because of this that Ethan couldn't understand why she was reaching out to him. She wasn't someone he knew, not someone he ever thought he'd meet in his life. Eleanor was a lonely woman, living alone in a large and desolate mansion. Although she owned a vast fortune, from what Ethan had heard, she had no family. The close relationships in her life seemed to have shattered, and she was left alone in that house, with only her calculations and ambitions that never ceased. Their meeting took place in a quiet cafe, a small place with old wooden tables and chairs, dim lighting, creating an uncomfortable yet mysterious atmosphere. Ethan walked in, looked around, and immediately saw Eleanor sitting there, her expression unchanged. There was no warmth, but also no excessive coldness. She simply sat there, waiting. When she saw Ethan, Eleanor's eyes seemed to offer a faint smile. "Hello, Ethan," she said in a deep yet determined voice. "I know this will be a difficult proposal for you, but I need you to listen." Eleanor's words were not rushed. On the contrary, they made Ethan feel as if she had planned everything long ago. "Have you ever thought about changing your life?" Eleanor continued. "Not just changing your life, but your family's life. Your entire world." At this point, Ethan began to feel the ambiguity in her words. She spoke about his life, his family, as if she knew everything. But what surprised him the most was what she said next. "In fact," Eleanor said, "I need you to help me accomplish something very important. If you agree to marry me, I will clear all the debts that your family is burdened with. You won't have to worry about financial difficulties anymore. Furthermore, I will protect you, protect your family for life." The proposal was unlike anything Ethan could have imagined. He sat still, saying nothing, feeling as though he had been pushed into another world where unbelievable things were slowly becoming reality. This could be the opportunity for his family to escape poverty. But why him? Why Ethan? A poor student and not some other successful man? Ethan couldn't understand why Eleanor had chosen him. But one thing was certain. The proposal was too tempting to refuse. The huge debts, the financial pressure weighing on his family for so long, could all be solved with just a nod. But was the price truly redemption, or just a horrible trap from which he couldn't escape? This choice was not simple. It was not just a change in Ethan's life, but also a change in his family's, in everything he had known about this world. He couldn't ignore Eleanor's proposal, but he also couldn't help but wonder if he was stepping into a game whose rules he didn't know. And Ethan, with all his doubts and hesitations, finally decided to respond to Eleanor's proposal. He couldn't refuse, for deep inside, he held a vague belief that this was the only chance to save his family from complete collapse. But he didn't know that this was just the beginning of a journey full of surprises and dangers he couldn't predict. Ethan Hall sat in his rented room, the cold walls seeming to suppress every thought in his mind. His heart beat heavily, not from worry, but from a single question. Why him? Why a poor student, living in poverty, with no assets, no power, nothing but a heart full of responsibility toward his family? This couldn't just be a coincidence. How could someone like Eleanor, rich, powerful, and having faced so many challenges in life, choose him? Someone who had never known happiness in life? That question kept circling in Ethan's mind, preventing him from thinking about anything else. His whole life, the difficulties in his studies, the financial burdens, everything seemed to have converged into this moment, a moment where he had to face an unimaginable proposition, a proposal from Eleanor Brooks, the 71-year-old woman, so wealthy that no one in the elite circle could compare to her, wanting him to marry her. But why? What did she need from him? someone with nothing but self-respect and a desire to protect his family. For long nights, Ethan tried to find an answer. He searched the corners of his home, where he could hear the echoes of the past. His mother's sighs, the faint laughter of his sister. He couldn't stop thinking about his family. They were struggling with enormous debt, facing unpayable bills, and he had no way to save them. What could he do when all choices seemed exhausted? Could accepting Eleanor's proposal be the only solution to escape this crisis? The answer gradually revealed itself when he accidentally overheard a conversation one night, a short dialogue, but one that contained a truth he never expected. One evening, as Ethan walked past the living room, he accidentally heard Eleanor's voice through the phone speaker. Her tone was cold, but also full of power. "Yes, we'll do everything according to plan. His family cannot know. Everything will be fine. As long as Ethan agrees, we can accomplish everything." Ethan froze at the door, his eyes wide open, feeling as if he had been stabbed. His family cannot know. That was the last thing he heard, but what she said was enough for him to realize the truth. He was not a random choice in Eleanor's plan. He was merely a pawn in the power game she had set up. Gradually, the pieces of the story began to form a clear picture. The secrets Eleanor had been hiding all this time were not just about a happy life or love. She didn't need him for a simple reason like affection or love. Eleanor wanted revenge on his family. Revenge for what his father had done to her in the past. Ethan's father, whom he had always respected and loved, had made grave mistakes with Eleanor. His father's failures had destroyed her life, causing her to live in pain and loneliness. Now, Eleanor was looking for a way to get everything back. She chose Ethan, not because he was the only one who could help her carry out her plan, but because she saw him as a means to exact her revenge. Ethan couldn't believe what he had just discovered. He felt deceived, as if he had become a pawn in a power game Eleanor had been preparing for a long time. His entire life had suddenly become part of a game he hadn't even known about. He had believed that he would find an opportunity to change his family's life. But now he realized that this salvation came at too great a cost. Ethan's mind was in turmoil. He couldn't deny that his family was in an inescapable situation. His mother was facing large debts. His sister was too young to understand the gravity of the situation. Everything seemed to be falling apart, and he was the only one who could save them. But the price of that salvation was the sacrifice of his own self-respect. He had no choice but to enter this game, even knowing that Eleanor's revenge would drag not just him, but his entire family down with him. The feeling of guilt began to haunt Ethan every day. He knew he was being manipulated, but he couldn't stop thinking about what would happen if he refused. Could his family survive without Eleanor's help? Was there another way to save them without sacrificing his self-respect? He couldn't help but feel conflicted inside. His reason wanted to reject everything, but his family's responsibility urged him to accept. Every time he looked into his mother's eyes, into his sister's innocent eyes, he couldn't help but wonder if he was doing the right thing. In those long, sleepless nights, Ethan decided he had to learn more about Eleanor. He didn't just want to know why she chose him, but also to uncover all the dark secrets she was hiding. He searched through every corner of the past, from whispered conversations in the dark to forgotten documents. Gradually, he realized that he had been pulled into a game from which he couldn't escape. Ethan was faced with a harsh choice. Could he continue to live by his principles, or would he be swept into Eleanor's plan and lose himself? After Ethan agreed to Eleanor's proposal, he moved into her vast mansion. From the moment he stepped through the grand gates, he felt as though he had entered another world. The mansion was not only enormous, but also designed like a fortress, with thick walls, long, endless corridors, and lavishly decorated bedrooms. But contrary to its luxurious appearance, an oppressive feeling constantly lingered around him. He felt like a pawn in a game whose rules he didn't fully understand. Each day, Ethan grew more unfamiliar with life in the mansion. Despite being the owner of the house, Eleanor always kept a cold distance from him. She didn't spend much time with him. Instead, She had long nights filled with work, phone calls, and private meetings. The staff, from the butler to the maids, all acted in silence, as if they were all keeping a secret they dared not reveal. Ethan felt isolated, with no one to share his thoughts, and it seemed no one wanted to be close to him. A strange and uncomfortable feeling always engulfed him every time he entered another room or met someone in the mansion. At night, the dim lights in the mansion only added to the mystery. Ethan could not deny that doubt was slowly growing in his heart. Why was everything in this mansion so perfect that nothing seemed natural? He couldn't understand why everyone behaved the way they did. Even those working for Eleanor didn't want to talk to him. Was it because he was an outsider, or because they all knew something that he couldn't? One night, unable to sleep, Ethan decided to wander through the mansion. He walked down the long corridors, his hand brushing against the cold walls, his eyes focused on every tightly shut door. A strong sensation rose within him, as if something was waiting for him in the darkness. A door creaked open, and he couldn't resist stepping inside. The room inside was unlike anything he had imagined. It wasn't decorated as luxuriously as the other rooms, but was simple and dark, with a large desk covered in documents. Ethan stepped in, the weak light from the only desk lamp illuminating the old sheets of paper. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the documents about his own family, papers containing information he never thought he would learn. These papers weren't just about his father, but also dark secrets, complex relationships between his father and Eleanor that he had never known. Among the papers were ancient contracts, unsent letters, and even financial documents detailing transactions his father had been involved in. Everything pointed to one undeniable fact. His father, the man he had always admired, had been involved in dark power schemes that Ethan had never imagined. The so-called marriage between his father and Eleanor wasn't just a financial arrangement, but a power struggle between two families, a war that had been going on long before he was born. Ethan was struck with a great shock. What he had once thought was just a normal business relationship turned out to be a fierce battle, where each side had its own hidden agenda. Eleanor didn't just want revenge on his family. She wanted to take the power his father had once held, and he, just a pawn in this game. He was horrified to realize that everything he had once believed about Eleanor, about his family's life, had been nothing but pieces of a puzzle he couldn't comprehend. What he thought was a new life, an opportunity to escape poverty, had now turned into an inescapable battle where he was no longer the master of his own fate. A sense of helplessness rose within Ethan. He wanted to throw it all away, to run away from the mansion, from Eleanor, and from all the secrets he had just uncovered. But he also knew that by doing so, he would not only ruin his own future, but also hurt his family, the ones he had promised to protect. Between these two choices, he couldn't decide. Ethan felt as though he were trapped in a snare with no way out. He was not just a husband in this marriage. He was also a tool for Eleanor to execute her plan. Everything he did had to serve her purpose, and every decision he made was influenced by the secrets he had just discovered. Tension gradually built up within Ethan, and he didn't know if he could keep his sanity as everything around him slowly collapsed. The truth came to light on a quiet night, when Ethan couldn't sleep due to the jumbled thoughts about what he had discovered in Eleanor's secret room. Everything in front of him now appeared as a blurry mist, impossible to define. He stood there, in the room full of documents, reading over and over each page he had found. Every word, every sentence struck his mind like a heavy blow. Things he thought he had understood for so long were now completely overturned. Ethan realized that Eleanor was not just a high society woman, a wealthy wife seeking peace in life. She didn't need him for love, or the simple necessity of a marriage. No, the truth was that Eleanor had been planning for a long time, and he was just a pawn in the power game she had plotted from the beginning. Her goal was not financial stability or a happy life with him. She had no intention of loving or caring for him. It was simply a power game, a struggle for dominance, And he, Ethan, was just a part of that plan. He couldn't believe what he had just discovered. She, the one he had thought was his savior, was actually scheming to take revenge on his family. The documents in his hands proved this. Eleanor didn't just want to reclaim what she had lost long ago. She wanted to take revenge on Ethan's father, the man she had considered her enemy for many years. And in her plan, Ethan was the tool she would use to execute that. Ethan looked at the documents again, each detail clear. Every number, every word pointed to a truth that was beyond belief. His father, the man he had once idolized, had hurt Eleanor in ways Ethan couldn't even imagine. His father's mistakes had caused irreparable damage to Eleanor, and now she wanted to reclaim everything that had been lost. And Ethan, with all his innocence, had become the instrument for her revenge. Each thought weighed heavily on his heart. He felt betrayed. Everything he had thought was an opportunity to save his family now turned out to be just a trap. He had been manipulated by Eleanor from the start. The marriage proposal, the promise of a bright future, all of it had been lies to draw him into this trap. The feeling of betrayal and disappointment flooded Ethan. He looked at himself, at the choice he had made. He had believed that marrying Eleanor would help him and his family escape their hardships. But now he realized that this salvation had only brought him a life full of control and exploitation. He was no longer in control of his life. He was merely a pawn in Eleanor's hands. Every decision he made was being manipulated by schemes he couldn't control. Ethan felt pain. He thought about his mother, his sister. Everything he had done, everything he had hoped for, now seemed meaningless. He couldn't understand how he had been deceived so completely. He thought he was doing the right thing, trying to protect his family, but the reality was far from what he had imagined. His relationship with Eleanor grew more strained than ever. Ethan couldn't stop questioning his choice. Could he escape this trap? Was there anything he could do to break the power game that Eleanor had set up around him? He felt like he was no longer himself, but a person caught in a game he never wanted to play. The betrayal didn't just come from Eleanor, but also from everything he had trusted for so long. He had thought that as long as he had the courage to accept Eleanor's proposal, everything would be better. But now he realized that the price of that choice was too high, and he couldn't afford it. After discovering the horrific secrets that Eleanor had hidden in her secret room, Ethan felt like he had fallen into a world filled with darkness. He could not ignore the fact that his father, the man he had once idolized and admired, was the one who had harmed Eleanor. He began searching for any traces that could prove what he had discovered. Undeniable evidence of his family's dark past and the wrongdoings his father had committed. Every day, Ethan scoured for documents in Eleanor's mansion. He examined financial papers, unsent letters, reports, and contracts that he never expected to have a direct connection to his family. One day, while rummaging through some papers in a hidden drawer, he found a copy of an old contract. It clearly outlined the relationship between his father and Eleanor. Ethan read every word of the contract, his heart seemingly stopping. This was not just a financial arrangement, it was a dark deal. His father had taken everything from Eleanor, her wealth, her dignity, and possibly much more that Ethan couldn't even imagine. He found many unsent letters that Eleanor had written but never had the chance to send. The words in these letters expressed her pain, anger, and feelings of betrayal. Eleanor was not simply seeking revenge for what his father had done to her family. She wanted to expose all the mistakes his father had made and make others aware of the suffering she had endured. Every time he read these letters, Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He couldn't imagine what Eleanor had gone through, and he couldn't fathom why his father would inflict such harm on someone. From these documents, Ethan began to realize that Eleanor was not just a simple woman. She had been through many hardships in her life that he had never known. She had been drawn into a power struggle in which his father played an essential part, and now she was trying to reclaim everything she had lost. Meanwhile, Ethan found himself caught up in her plans, unaware, a tool she could use to achieve her goals. But in the process of gathering evidence, Ethan also discovered a deeper truth that he couldn't ignore. His father had reasons behind his actions. The decisions his father had made were not random. There was a connection between his family and Eleanor that no one could see. What Ethan had not expected was that his father and Eleanor had once shared a painful past, a past that his father had tried to keep hidden for years. These secrets were not only about power, but also about the regret and sacrifices his father had been unable to make. Now, faced with all the undeniable evidence he had gathered, Ethan couldn't help but ask himself, should he confront Eleanor and expose everything he had uncovered, or should he remain silent, protecting his family from the devastation of the truth? He couldn't help but think about the consequences of his actions. If he decided to reveal all these secrets, he knew it would not only hurt Eleanor, but also cause immense pain to his own family. What he had discovered could change their lives forever, and he didn't know if he could face the consequences. Feelings of guilt and confusion began to consume his mind. He wanted to do the right thing, to protect his family from the devastation of the truth, but he also understood that the truth always has its power. How could he face the truth when it could destroy everything he had once believed in? Could he salvage the situation, or would he be the one to pay the price for the mistakes his father had made? Ethan couldn't escape the temptation of exposing everything he had discovered. He knew that, no matter what choice he made, he could never go back to his old life. He had learned too much, and the truth always carries a terrifying power, sometimes causing destruction in ways that cannot be predicted. But if he decided to stay silent, was he truly doing the right thing? Ethan could no longer bear it. Each day, he felt like he was living in a nightmare, with no way to wake up. The secrets about his family, about Eleanor, the power games he never wanted to participate in, had thrown his life into chaos. He couldn't sit still while his life and family were being disrupted, manipulated by schemes he couldn't control. One choice remained: confront Eleanor, stand up, and demand that she stop. One evening, when the tension in the mansion had reached its peak, Ethan decided to enter Eleanor's room. Her room remained as it had always been, luxurious and cold. Everything around her was perfectly arranged, but nothing could hide the emptiness in her gaze. Eleanor sat there, as if she had been waiting for this confrontation for a long time. She didn't seem surprised to see Ethan. On the contrary, she merely smiled faintly, as if she already knew where this was heading. Ethan stood there holding the documents tightly in his hands. He had nothing left to lose. What had been hidden was now exposed. He looked at Eleanor, unable to believe that the woman he had once thought of as a savior was now the one destroying his life. "I can't let you continue this game anymore." "Eleanor," Ethan said, his voice faltering with tension. "I figured everything out. I have evidence. I know you're using me as a pawn in your revenge plan. You've destroyed my family, and now you need to stop." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She looked at Ethan, her eyes deep, as if seeing straight through him. After a moment of silence, she smiled faintly and shook her head. "Ethan, do you think you can change anything?" Eleanor said, her voice cold but not lacking indifference. "Everything has gone too far. It can't be undone. You can't stop this plan. It's too late." Eleanor's words were like a heavy blow to Ethan's heart. He felt as if he was being pushed into a deep pit with no way to escape. Everything he had hoped for, all the efforts he had made to protect his family, now seemed meaningless. She not only showed no remorse, but also admitted that everything had gone too far. The coldness in her words made Ethan feel as if he was being discarded, thrown away like something no longer of value. The relationship between them gradually grew more tense. Conversations were no longer the same, no longer with negotiation or understanding. Now, they were just two opposing forces in a relentless battle. Ethan looked at Eleanor, and in that moment, he understood that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't change the past. His father's mistakes, Eleanor's schemes, all of it was beyond his control. Ethan felt exhausted, drained. He wasn't just facing Eleanor, but also facing himself. He had chosen this path, and now he had to live with the consequences of his decisions. He wanted to protect his family, but he also couldn't help feeling guilty. He couldn't keep living in the shadow of those wrong decisions. What was he supposed to do to break free from this vicious cycle without leaving disastrous consequences for himself and his family? He knew that any decision he made now couldn't change everything. If he continued to face Eleanor, exposing the truth, could he save his family from the destruction of these secrets? Or would staying silent, accepting a life in the dark, be the only way to protect his family from total ruin? These thoughts gnawed at Ethan's mind. Each question seemed to make him more confused. Every decision came with a cost, and he didn't know if he could pay that price. The tension within him reached its peak. He felt like a ship being carried away in a storm, not knowing where the shore was, not knowing if he could survive. Ethan knew that this confrontation would decide everything. His decision would not only affect him, but also his family, the people he loved. He couldn't continue living in this uncertainty. He had to choose. A choice between the revenge Eleanor wanted to carry out and the forgiveness he had to give for the mistakes of the past. But could forgiveness be the right choice when everything had gone too far? In the end, the worst thing Ethan had feared finally happened. All the secrets, all the terrible plans that Eleanor had carefully constructed over time, were now exposed to the light. Everything he had discovered, all the evidence he had collected, could no longer be hidden. The story had come to an end in a way Ethan hadn't expected, but this was the outcome of a journey full of hardships and challenges that he had to endure. Eleanor, with all the power and influence she once had, could no longer escape the punishment of justice. Her wrongful actions, the schemes she had carried out in the dark, were finally revealed. Eleanor was arrested, not only for her illegal actions, but also for the crime she had committed against Ethan's family. She could no longer manipulate or control the lives of others as she had done with Ethan. When Ethan saw Eleanor being escorted away, he couldn't help but feel an odd sense of relief. Every piece of the chaotic puzzle of his life was finally coming together. He was no longer imprisoned by the secrets, no longer living under the control and power of Eleanor. His life and his family's could now begin a new chapter. He no longer had to endure manipulation or live in the shadows she had created. But as he reflected on the journey he had gone through, Ethan realized that, in addition to freeing his family from Eleanor's control, he had also freed himself from the mysterious past he had always tried to avoid. The truth he had uncovered not only changed his family's life, but it also changed him. He understood that, no matter how painful and dark the past was, it could not shape his future unless he allowed it. He had to face the truth, and now he could move forward, leaving behind the pain of the past. A part of Ethan's mind still couldn't forget the confrontations, the betrayals, and the wrong decisions he had faced, but the rest of him understood that, to truly emerge from that darkness, he had to learn how to forgive. And that was the lesson he had learned from everything that had happened. Forgiveness was not weakness, but a tremendous strength. It not only helped him release the grudges in his heart, but also freed him from himself, from the invisible chains he had bound himself in all this time. Ethan realized that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting the mistakes, but accepting them and learning to let go. He couldn't change the past, but he could change how he faced it. Instead of letting anger and hatred control him, he chose to leave it all behind, learning to forgive himself and those who had hurt him. He understood that only when he forgave could he truly be free. With all that he had learned from the challenges he had faced over time, Ethan began to step into a new chapter of his life. He was no longer the man consumed by fear and doubt. He was no longer a pawn in the hands of others. He was the master of his own fate. He decided not to let the mistakes of the past hold him back anymore, but to use the lessons he had learned to build a brighter future. Though the road ahead would not be easy, Ethan knew that he could face any challenge. He had found freedom, not through revenge or avoidance, but through forgiveness and the courage to face the truth. He knew that only when he forgave himself could he freely walk down a new path, the path of healing and restoration. And so, he began a new life, free from the shadows of pain and resentment, but instead, a future built on courage and trust in himself. Ethan stood in the quiet room, the faint light from the ceiling lamp not enough to dispel the darkness that engulfed his mind. Everything around him felt hazy. Nothing was clear. He looked into the mirror, his own eyes reflected back at him, not filled with hope, but with fatigue and disappointment, as if he had just gone through an endless battle with no way out. His life now seemed like a journey full of challenges, with no end in sight, no place for him to find peace. His heart no longer beat with the rhythm of a young man full of hope. Everything he had once believed in, everything he had longed for, had been traded for bitter truths. He had once thought that by facing Eleanor and exposing all the schemes she had laid out, he would find release. He had thought that after revealing the truth, he would feel relieved, no longer being caught up in the power games Eleanor had created. But when everything settled, when the truth had been exposed, he realized that release did not come from revenge, nor from exposing everything, but from forgiveness. Forgiveness for himself, forgiveness for those who had hurt him, and forgiveness for the mistakes he had made in his life. But was he strong enough to face this truth? Did he have the courage to step past the pain of the past, to live a life no longer governed by resentment or betrayal? Or would he continue to live in the shadows of revenge, in the shadow of the wrong decisions he could never change? These questions circled in his mind, with no clear answers. And when facing important decisions in life, each of us must confront similar questions. When the truth comes to light, when we discover we have been used in a power game, will we dare to face it and expose the truth? Or will we choose to live in deceit, continuing to hide what has happened, maintaining a false peace without facing the consequences? Ethan had to face these questions, and now he couldn't help but wonder if he could find peace in a world full of lies and schemes like this. He had chosen to confront Eleanor, had discovered the truth, but that didn't bring him the release he had expected. There had been too much pain, too much betrayal, and too many losses. Every step he took carried wounds that could never be erased. So, if you were Ethan, what would you do? Would you face the truth and expose everything, knowing that revenge might push you into a darker, harsher world? Could you stand up and confront the past, even though that past was filled with hurt and betrayal? Or would you continue to live in the shadow of revenge, continuing to hide secrets and lies, fearing that the truth would hurt too many people and might break everything? Looking at Ethan's story, it's not just him who has to face these questions. Each of us must face difficult decisions in life, moments when we have to choose between holding on to resentment or letting go and forgiving. The moments when we have to face the truth about ourselves and the people around us, but fear that the truth will destroy everything we have built. So, if you were Ethan, what would you do? Would you choose to face the truth and expose everything you have uncovered, knowing that it could destroy everything you have? Or would you choose to live in deceit, continuing to hide the truth to protect what you believe is important? Would you choose to forgive, knowing that forgiveness is not weakness, but strength? Or would you continue seeking revenge to prove you are not defeated? We would love to hear your thoughts. Please share your feelings in the comments section below this video. Ethan's story is not just his own, but the story of all of us, and everyone can find themselves in the decisions and challenges he faces. Don't hesitate to share your thoughts, as every opinion, every answer has value. This is an opportunity for us to reflect on our life choices, to learn and grow from stories like this. And if you found this story deeply moving, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next stories. We will always bring you emotional stories, challenges, and valuable lessons where we can share, learn, and find strength within ourselves. Thank you for accompanying us on this journey, and we hope you will continue to follow, share, and grow with us in the next stories.